Hello, everyone, and welcome to another TrialSite News interview. I'm your host, Brandon. Today, we'll be talking to patient advocacy groups around the globe supporting those impacted by the COVID vaccination rollout. I'm going to start in Denmark with Anette.
Hi.
Annette, can you give
Well,
us your full organization name?
yes, Foreningen for bivirkningsramte COVID-19-vaccination.
Okay, thanks for joining us, Annette. I'm going to go to Carolyn now in the UK.
Hello, I'm the Chair of Trustees of UKCVFamily, registered charity number 1207178.
And next, we're going to go to Australia and say hello to Rado.
G'day. So my organisation is Coverse, and I'm one of the founding members since 2022.
Okay, and our trip brings us back to the United States and Brianne Dressen.
Hey, I'm Brianne Dressen. I'm a co-founder of react19.org that's a registered nonprofit here in the US.
And finally, we're going to go to the news organization that's been covering this since the beginning, Daniel O'Connor, TrialSite News.
Thank you, Brandon. First of all, I want to thank everyone here for coming together to discuss this difficult topic. I consider you all heroes. You all are representing a lot of people that have not been cared for or heard, even heard. And I think because of your organizations, that's changing. Okay, and that's the good news. So here today, we're going to talk about these issues. We have four basic tracks. We're going to try to keep it to about 15 minutes per track. We're going to start with, what happens after an adverse event. What does that look like? Common injury, common patterns of impact, the medical uncertainty, the gaslighting that we experience, that is experienced when this happens. So I'd like to open it up. Brianne, maybe you could start with your experience in the United States.
Yeah, so here in the US, we were one of the first in the world to get the opportunity to be able to be vaccinated. I was in the clinical trials in the United States. I was harmed in the first part of November of 2020. Caroline Pover, who's also on the call, she actually wrote my biography. So if anybody wants to pick that up and learn more about the clinical trial issues and what the US government involvement was, you can pick up a copy of that book on Amazon. It's called Worth a Shot, and it's got uniform 5-star reviews. And so this in the US, we currently have an organization with 40,000 members, and that's just the United States membership. These are people that all stepped up and rolled up their sleeves to do the right thing to help get the world out of the pandemic, and unfortunately fell by the wayside. These are issues from anywhere from strokes to worsening MS to other autoimmune diseases that are brand new, CIDP, small fiber neuropathy, immune-mediated neuropathies, and the list just goes on and on. Organ system issues, organ system failures. And what we learned through collaborating with other organizations globally is that these are not country-specific issues. What we learned is by all of these other countries collecting the data on the patients that they too were gathering at the same time, that it was the same thing. No matter what we thought we were looking at, it's not special, it's not unique. It does not discriminate by political party or race or gender. This is something that's uniform across the globe.
On that note, Brianne, I would like to go to Annette. How has been the public health authorities in even recognizing that there could be problems, even if it's rare? I know there was some report that the Danish government did. Could you share your experience,
Well,
Annette?
Yeah, it's kind of a roller coaster because one week they say that we have these rare events. Next week they say, well, they're not enough, so we need to help them. And then they say that we can't prove there's any harm because the patients are not allowed in hospitals for tests or diagnosis. So I get different kind of answers every time I ask them, and I go to meetings with them as well, try to figure this out, but I never get a real answer, depending on who you're talking to and which agency as well, because they had different tasks.
But I do know just from reporting that the Danish regulator has been very hesitant to open up a dialogue. Is that a correct assumption?
Well, that's a nice way to put it. Yes.
No.
It's very difficult, and they have been doing studies that they use the data they have, but the problem is that the patients are not registered. They don't have a diagnosis code, and there are over 211,000 reported events from this rollout in the database, but it's kept in one agency and not shared with anyone else, and the patients are not followed up. So they don't even know if the people who experienced to be harmed are still alive, or are they back to work? Are they on benefits? They don't know.
So thank you, Annette. So in the UK, how about there? Are there ways if one is struggling with harm that has come their way because of this rollout? Are the National Health Service, is that recognizing this issue? Are there ways to get care in the UK?
There's no treatment pathways. So it's a bit of an interesting situation. Most of our members are actually told, either formally or informally, that their health condition is related to, or very likely related to, the COVID vaccine. We have, I think, 40% have it on their records, 30% have been told formally, but the practitioner won't put it in writing. And then another 30% are still looking for answers. So we say about 70% of our members have been told, so they know that what their condition is very likely due to. I'm quite unusual. I was told straight away, so I didn't have to battle for recognition. And my healthcare providers have been very kind on the whole. But that isn't the case with everybody. And even if you are diagnosed, there's then no pathway. So in some ways, it's not even the GP's fault. They literally don't know what to do. And that's one of the things that we've tried to come up with, is potential care pathways. But yeah, there's nothing that can happen. And we've just had the COVID inquiry and the report and recommendations from Module 4, which is vaccines and therapeutics. In that report, there was nothing about establishing a care pathway at all. And that was where we were expecting it to be mentioned. Perhaps not in detail, but yeah, we've had the opportunity, the UK has had the opportunity to put in place a care pathway, and it has not taken that opportunity.
It did not. And Carolyn, we'll get more into that. That's a very, very important data point from our standpoint. Rado, in Australia, again, that country, we were talking before we went live about some of the onerous restrictions that happen in Australia. Now, we've seen some discussions. Your group has been formed and done great work. And there's a lawsuit recently. Can you maybe just summarize, is it similar in Australia where there's no pathway? I believe there's a public health system as well. It's somewhat social medicine. Can you describe your experience and some of your members, what the challenges they face when seeking care?
I think the comments that have been said here already, we echo them here. We're the same challenges. Our healthcare system is a hybrid public and private system. So people do have options more than in some other countries, but it's also cheaper than in some other countries. But when it came to the vaccine, we faced exactly the same roadblocks. We do have some centres around the country located in our major cities that are supposed to be tasked to case manage those instances of serious vaccine-related harms. A number of our people have been referred to them, not many. I would say it's less than 10%, and actually I'd say it's less than 5%, but and when they do get referred there, the best that they can hope for is a diagnosis of, a vaccine-related injury. But in most circumstances, the recommendation that those people get is to have another vaccine. So it's not much of a case management centre. And then those people, unfortunately, they don't get counted properly. When there's a system that, particularly during the midst of a pandemic, where amongst the medical profession you had these two competing forces. One is this anxiety around this new threat of this new virus, and so the medical profession wanting to protect their patients, protect their systems, protect the community. But on the other side, we had some regulatory actors who were coming down really hard on the medical profession, particularly those who were speaking out, whether about what they were seeing with vaccine reactions or concerns about vaccine reactions. And so doctors were reluctant also to report them. And so, yeah, the situation for us, though, as patients, is the same outcome regardless. We faced a roadblock. We didn't get the treatment or recognition that we deserved. And when it came to compensation, we did have a national compensation program that lasted for a grand total of 2.5 years, and it's closed now. And it didn't capture the vast majority of us who've been harmed. So what this class action is all about is going back to the government and saying, you guys didn't tell the public what was going on, you didn't tell people what was being reported, and you didn't follow up and support these people. So you're accountable for the harms that these people suffer.
Thank you, Rado, which is very important. And that is a nice transition to our next section, which we'll go through pretty quickly, but it's extremely important. That is compensation schemes. Brianne, in the US, let's talk about CICP and what that has looked like or not looked like in terms of helping people after this massive rollout. We'll go through each country and look at compensation mechanisms and schemes. Brianne, thank you.
Well, this is just another way that we will draw some very interesting, unfortunate parallels between these countries. And we probably should mention that we are all key partners in an organization called the COVID Vaccine Injury Alliance. You can find it online at covidvaccineinjuryalliance.org. And it is an organization comprised of groups just like us that are people that have been harmed, who are advocating for others who have been harmed within our countries. There's about 20 countries. Rado probably has the exact number off the top of his head. But if anybody globally is looking for resources within their own countries, that's probably the first place to start. Because as we mentioned, there is not really adequate medical care anywhere. And it does seem that the best support that people are able to find is with other patients that are dealing with the same thing that they are. But with that said, so compensation in the US is a little bit complicated. Just so people are aware, there was a law passed. It's called the PrEP Act, and the PrEP Act provides full blanket immunity for all people that are participating and moving quickly during an emergency situation. The emergency was declared in the US, and what that means is that the manufacturers were immune from liability for harms. The individual, whether it was a nurse or a doctor that administered the shot in your arm, they're also immune. And the federal administrators are also immune from anything up through willful misconduct. That's the standard at which they've placed. So with that said, that means that there are no lawsuits due to injury in the United States because of COVID vaccination program, and there will not be in the future, full stop. That means that the government has placed itself as the intermediary, the person responsible for addressing the compensation or these types of issues. So they now are in a position where not only should they do it, but now they have to, because they have replaced people's constitutional right to a fair jury trial with this program. So we'll talk about this program. It's the CICP, and the CICP has 13,000 Americans still 5 years later waiting to be adjudicated. This program has an average payout of about $4,000. There's 3 outliers. Of the 43 people that have been paid, the 3 outliers are 2 deaths and a severe case of TTS from J&J. So an average payout of $4,000. There is a 97.5% rejection rate, and you have 1 year to file, and you are not allowed legal representation. So people's right to fair jury trial, to legal representation, to a speedy trial, these are constitutional rights that are protected like through the US Constitution. Those have all been erased and replaced with a program that is very clearly failing Americans that stepped up and did the right thing when our country asked.
Thank you, Brianne. And you've been really at the forefront of taking this head on, and we're grateful for that. Anette, in Denmark, is there a compensation program for those that experience adverse events and harm after the COVID rollout?
Yes, it's a national compensation scheme owned by the state, and it's for all sorts of injuries, misconduct in hospitals, also vaccine injuries, but they have limitations. They actually asked me for a meeting when we have formed our association and wanted to talk with me about this, but they can't give out compensation to patients if what is wrong with them, their sickness, whatever happened after the rollout, is not in the resume. Who is, well, it's actually being written as they roll out these vaccines, because they didn't know about side effects. So it's like writing a book, and if your injuries or your harm is not in that, you're not harmed. And it doesn't matter if it's in your medical records or you passed out 2 minutes after the injection. You're not harmed if it's not, if the EMA says it's not, if it's not in there. So
yes.
We also have a big a part of patients who are rejected, even though it's in the medical records, and it's visible on scans and everything, but they still can't get compensation.
Which is a tragedy. And again, Denmark typically feels like a pretty fair place, but when it came to this topic, it was anything but fair. And we've, followed your struggles and your heroic effort over there to try to change this. Now, I know in both UK and Australia, we'll start with Carolyn in UK, there is a compensation scheme. I think it's a little bit fairer over in the UK based on what we've followed. It's not great, but it's compared to what Brianne described, which is, I think the worst in the world. Carolyn, do you want to maybe speak a little bit about UK compensation scheme? What does that look like? How fair is it?
We don't have a compensation scheme at all.
No.
So it's not compensation. We have a vaccine damage payment scheme.
Okay.
But the government's very careful to say that this is not compensation. So we have that. We also have a very low success rate, 2%. I think we're the lowest in the world. Japan's the highest at 74% success rate. And we also, like Denmark, it doesn't matter what's on your medical records. It doesn't matter what you've been diagnosed with. If you don't have a condition that's listed in something called the Green Book, then you won't be granted it. There are 2 levels to it. First of all, you have to pass the causation criteria. So most people just fail at that one. And then if you do get causation, you then have to be at least 60% disabled. And then most people will then fail at the second one after that, and then just 2% get that. It was the one thing that came out of the COVID inquiry. Recommendations were immediate reform of the vaccine damage payment scheme. It's not been, the amount of money hasn't been changed since 2007, and the scheme itself was set up in 1979 just as a temporary measure. But no matter how you reform it, if you don't go back to changing the Green Book, the things that are listed on the Green Book, and they come from what is reported to the MHRA, and then there are all of those other problems related to the yellow card scheme. So if you go back, the hurdles start with reporting of adverse reactions and how that's managed, like Anette said, and we have the same problems with what we call the yellow card scheme. So our VDPS, it doesn't work. It's not fit for purpose, and it hasn't been for a very long time.
It's broken, and I'm hearing you loud and clear. And in fact, just to add on to what you said, it's true. We covered Taiwan, Japan, a few countries. I think South Korea seem to be a little bit more rational than these American and European countries. Thank you, Carolyn. Rado, in Australia, is it similar to the UK, or is it different?
It's different from everywhere discussed so far. Prior to the pandemic, Australia did not have any vaccine compensation scheme at all. And as of today, we don't have any compensation schemes. So it ran for a very limited time. But like Caroline just described, the way compensation was decided was based on those adverse conditions that were listed by our regulator on the product pamphlet. So you can imagine, the myocarditis and pericarditis for the mRNA vaccines, etc. Then there were other bureaucratic hurdles you had to jump through. In addition to having that on your record, you had to have spent at least one night as an inpatient in the hospital, and you had to have to prove you lost at least $1,000 in costs or lost earnings or whatever. And the way it was set up like that, it meant that an awful lot of people who relied entirely on the public health system were not eligible for compensation, especially if they were retirees or people who are not otherwise working. And so it was exclusionary right from the beginning. Now, as everyone here has already said, many of us on our medical records, not from one, not from two, but sometimes dozens of specialists have said, yes, this was caused by the vaccine. Under the Australian program, that doesn't matter. And same with other programs here. If it was not listed on the product label, you won't get compensated. And some of the assessments that our people have been through, the government's own assessors have come back and said, yes, this was caused by the vaccine, but we're not allowed to compensate you because the scheme doesn't allow for it.
So, Rado, it's like each other country. It's this unfair bureaucratic hurdle that everybody has to go through. And then, in the case of Australia, they closed it down, and hence the lawsuit, right? That you had mentioned earlier.
The lawsuit actually started earlier because all of these problems were anticipated right from the beginning. And the person who's led this lawsuit is actually a GP who saw a unexpected increase in a range of medical conditions. So she knew something was up, and also had a pharmacology background as well as medicine. So was well positioned to investigate and understand both the bureaucratic, medico-bureaucratic side of things, but also the actual science.
So thank you, Rado. I really appreciate that. And this is a nice transition again into research and evidence. So, when they roll out vaccines, they're supposed to be doing surveillance ongoing, okay? And we have these public systems such as VAERS in the United States. The UK has its system. Denmark and Australia. Brianne, do we want to talk about evidence? I think React-19, it's fair to say, has been at the forefront of identifying and organizing evidence so that we can have a better understanding of what some of the impacts are. Brianne, do you want to maybe talk about what does the institutions, the government accept And what are we finding as well, and what's that delta?
Well, the US government has largely accepted and acknowledged a very short number of adverse events. Obviously, the J&J has Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a severe neuropathic autoimmune condition that has led to people losing their lives because their heart eventually gets paralyzed and their lungs get paralyzed. There are medical interventions for this, but you have to recognize the condition first to then provide these high impact, very high risk interventions that are also very expensive. They're usually done in the hospital. And J&J also has severe TTS, which is thrombocytopenia. We also see those with AstraZeneca quite a bit. But myocarditis, and that's basically it in the US. So if you're going to be recognized through the federal health system, it's going to be one of those three conditions, which by our patient surveys that we've done, we've identified that about 4 to 5% of our patient population actually report being diagnosed with myo or pericarditis. And there's an even smaller number that have reported that they've had strokes or some kind of thrombotic event. And then the rest have still yet to be accounted for or recognized in any way, shape, or form on the government level, and therefore on the medical level. On the scientific front, Rado's organization, Coverse, and React-19 have both partnered together to really comb through the scientific literature to identify what is the science telling us, right? There's 4 studies globally that have been repeated over and over and over saying these vaccines are safe and effective, end of story, full stop. Everybody be happy with your choice to get vaccinated, move on with your lives, right? Well, we here are the ones that are clear evidence, because we ourselves are harmed. We are the clear evidence that there isn't a not so sunny side, just like any other drug out there. Vaccines do have side effects as well. And sometimes those vaccines can have serious adverse events that do alter people's lives permanently. It can either result in death, or in those of us here, it has resulted in disability, right? So we have a database that Rado's organization has helped keep updated. They've combed through all the research. And just so people are aware, Rado himself is a scientist. So he does have an ability to discern some of this stuff. So how many studies is it now, Rado, that we've accumulated? Like
about 4,500.
Yeah. And these are just adverse events after COVID vaccination. And so while this doesn't say these are caused by shots, right? That's not what we're saying. What we're trying to do is help identify what the published lit is telling us, even though the governments are not acknowledging it. There are medical professionals globally that are identifying and are recognizing a potential causal link in the patients that they're seeing. And so they're putting their time and effort into putting these reports out into the scientific literature.
And again, I have to compliment this effort that you both are doing. We've written articles about some of the studies you all have actually been a part of and have documented. So it's been incredible work that you both have done. Anette, in Denmark, are the evidence points that are being identified, do they just follow the US government? How is the Danish government looking at the evidence?
Well, the government and the authorities do not agree. That's a short story, but according to the Danish health authorities, the human body is Danish. So that means that any scientific evidence coming from other than their own data is not to be trusted or to be used. But government, or say parliament, have had several meetings with them, and they have actually tried to help the patients by asking questions about how do we access help for those who are harmed. And but the Minister of Health is the only one who can force the health authorities to help the patients.
So, and we've spoken about this. What I hear in Denmark is elected officials, at least to some extent, have been open to try to help the patients, but the health bureaucracy has been resistant to be open to unfolding science, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, there is no science. There's only the data they collected themselves. And we actually did a survey during an HTA that the Danish Medical Agency was doing regarding COVID. And it turns out that they say about 10% from all side effects are being reported in Denmark. I don't know how they figured it out, and we did a survey that out of those 10%, about 70% of the injuries are reported by the patients themselves because the doctors won't do it. And a lot of the patients don't even have a diagnosis code because they, like in many other countries, don't have treatment paths. They don't get a diagnosis. And we actually have data coming out saying that these patients who we know, who have organ failure and are definitely not healthy, they are registered as healthy individuals ready for new vaccine trials.
Yes,
so they're being invited. Yes.
Yeah. Yes, we reported on that thanks to working with you. That in briefly in Denmark, they're actually re-enrolling individuals, patients who have existing issues from the first rollout into new trials. So
yes,
this is a real issue. Carolyn, in the UK, I know you have your what is it? The yellow book that they call it? The
yellow card scheme.
Yellow card scheme. Yes, of course. That. Can you just briefly talk about that? And is it the same situation generally, or is there any difference there with evidence?
Pretty much the same. We have on the government website, actually, same as Anette, it says it's estimated that only 10% of serious reactions and between 2 and 4% of non-serious reactions are reported. So the yellow card scheme, as of the middle of June 2023, I think they've stopped putting the reports out for COVID vaccine report adverse reaction reports at 481,000 people with suspected adverse reactions. So that was after the first 2 years, so about 500,000 people. So you make a report. The website's very difficult to use and very complicated, especially for people with neurological issues. But you fill in the form. There's a checklist of conditions, so you can't necessarily just add all of the other strange things that might be going on. And there is no follow-up. So you submit it. They don't follow up. They don't research you. They don't check in to see how you're doing. So somebody might be reporting a migraine, and that's reported, but you won't be able to say, I've had a migraine every single day for 5 months after the vaccine. So they're two very, very different reactions, aren't they? Very different things. So that, yeah, they're not investigated. And that is supposed to be what will then feed back to the MHRA to see if there's a problem. But they're not investigated, they're not researched. And there is, as again, this is something that's just come out of the COVID inquiry here. The inquiry has said they see no basis upon which to make the reporting of suspected adverse reactions mandatory. That's very, very, very concerning, because most normal people would assume that if something went wrong, your doctor would have to report it. But in the UK, they've actually stated it very clearly, they do not have to report it.
That's a very important data point on next steps I want to go back to. So please, let's not forget that. Thank you, Carolyn. I know in Australia, there's the database adverse event notification, DANE, I believe they call in Australia, are from Therapeutic Goods Administration, which is, your FDA. Is this in Australia a similar story that we're hearing in these other countries?
Exactly the same. Well, it's not even an agency; it's part of our Department of Health. So there's no independence, and that is part of one source of the problems. There's no political or structural separation from the people who purchased the vaccines, indemnified the manufacturers, developed a inadequate compensation scheme, decides who can get compensation. So the same people are responsible for all of that and approving the drugs and monitoring the adverse reactions. We did do an analysis a couple of years back looking at the numbers that were reported in that database. Now, there were something like 140,000 adverse reactions reported, of which about 20,000 were considered serious. Now, the headline number there, 140,000 adverse reactions, that accounts for almost 1/4 of all reports since that organisation began collecting data in 1971.
Wow.
That in itself is a major safety signal, in my opinion, right? There's no way, people here just on this chat, you think about the various vaccines you've had in your life up until this point, and the other drugs you've had. There's no way that anyone can say, oh, but we vaccinated all these people at once. Of course the numbers are big. Well, it just doesn't stack up when you think about all the other products you've taken throughout your life. So, but when there have been reports come out from a collaboration between the Department of Health and academics looking at this data, and they gloss over that point. They say, yes, there are lots of numbers, but it was because of, we gave many doses at once, or because doctors were told to look out for it. Well, same problem as in the UK. In a lot of parts of Australia, it was not compulsory to report, and in fact, they were discouraged from reporting under in a lot of institutions, and medical regulators discouraging that as well. So, yeah, and then there's no follow-up. I just, as a scientist, it boggles my mind how they can say that these types of reactions are mild and short-lived. You remember what they were saying about the young men who got mild myocarditis, mild and short-lived. Yet they have absolutely no evidence for making that claim, because they never, ever, ever follow up on any of these cases.
That's right. No, that's fundamentally right, what you just shared. And, one of the very disturbing, talking points we hear from all of this, for everybody, is that, well, these aren't causal, and, we can't be sure. But the whole point of these systems is to detect signals. That's the whole point. And we saw signals, and that is what it is. Look, I think, as we come here to the finish line, I want to close this out with each one of you, referring to everything you've learned and what has to happen for us to trust our public health authorities, to help people get the care that they need, and to ensure this never happens again. I'd like to go to each one of you, starting with Brianne. What are the next steps? What do we have to do? Starting, in the United States, Brianne, we have, I think, a reform-minded government, at least in some ways. What needs to happen, Brianne, from your standpoint, over the next couple years to improve the situation?
Common sense would lead us to step one would be simple recognition, right? This is one of the big issues that people are having globally. You can't find what you're not looking for. And this starts with actually broadening the scope of identifying harms from, a very small, secular, in my opinion, biased little part of the government. And why are we depending on the government to identify conditions that are brand new, right? Through the scientific process, it usually takes 10 to 15, sometimes 20 years for new conditions to be identified. It's incredibly naive of us to think that we're going to roll out a brand new product into a mass vaccination program and then think that we're magically right away going to identify all of the possible problems with it within the first year or even 2 years, right? And then you add on to that the fact that there is no way to monitor these issues outside of the government system. So in the US, there is no diagnosis code for this. So there is no way to actually recognize these conditions or acknowledge them through the medical system. Once that data is generated in an appropriate format by using diagnosis codes, we're able to track these through the data outside of the government system. And that would put the power and the ability to identify harms outside of the system. So that's step one, is diagnosis codes. Step two, obviously, the compensation schemes globally need to be reformed. Here in the US, we have this blanket immunity that really has hindered people's ability to get any kind of compensation or any kind of help, right? So we've got people, and this is also global. We've got people in the US that are literally, they've spent every dime that they have. They've created GoFundMes. Those GoFundMes have raised tens of thousands of dollars. All of that money goes and is gone, right? So here we are 5 years out. The medical bills, they keep coming in, right? There's one medication I'm on still to this day, and it costs over $200,000 a year just for one medication. There is no way that people that are out of work that cannot qualify for disability, because this is not a recognized medical set of medical conditions, there is no way that they're going to be able to afford to even live, right? So we have people living in their cars, people that have moved back in with their elderly parents. Their elderly parents are now needing help and support themselves that they can't give to their ailing, disabled adult children, right? And at the end of the day, what all of us really just want is we want to be able to re-engage in society as we were before. We want to go back to being productive citizens. We want to go back to being able to be good parents to our kids and be able to no longer be a burden on the system. But the system has to recognize the problem first for us to be able to start healing. The third thing is we need to get some dedicated clinics put together on this. This is something the US easily can do. They can start a clinic at the NIH, fly out the most critical new conditions. For example, if there is a Lyme vaccine that is implemented here in the US, there is no proper pathway for these patients that will fall through the cracks to get care. It doesn't exist. So a clinic at the NIH or a clinic offsite that is totally independent of the politics that is largely led us all to this problem, that would be a good step 3. So we've got recognition through diagnosis codes, compensation reform, and also proper care clinics.
Care, 100%, Brianne, that makes total sense. And I just have to say that we have multiple reports that we've covered of assisted suicides because of this problem. I didn't believe it until we saw it and spoke with people, and it's incredibly disturbing what can happen. It's mind-boggling. Annette, from your standpoint, what are at least 3 next steps in Denmark? And this could include international collaboration. I think the collaboration of the different groups here has been instrumental in keeping the effort to get the reform going. So Annette, from your standpoint, what do you feel needs to happen in Denmark? We will get this to government folks in Denmark. What's your thoughts?
Well, apparently, when you receive a COVID vaccine and get harmed, you become invincible. You disappear from every register, from every data. You aren't visible in a doctor's office or in the community. They can't see you. So what we need is to make the patients visible. And these are human beings who need help. That's very important. And you also need to know how many are there, what's wrong with them, how do we heal them? And for that, we need the international community, because there's no science here. Nothing. There's only data. And because we are invincible, we are not in there. So we literally do not exist. So we need science on this to help the patients get the right treatment. What we hear from doctors in offices is they cannot treat the symptoms from these vaccines because the patients do not respond to medication that usually helps with these symptoms. So they're faced with something new. They don't know what to do. The doctors can't refer the patients to any kind of specialist who can help them. And you don't get a diagnosis code. You are not recognized. You do not get compensation. But we actually have a national evaluation here who concluded that exactly that. We need registration, we need help, also because it affects the trust in authorities and in vaccines. So if you do not help these patients and find out what are the long-term effects of these products, they don't know. So that's all 3 in 1 there, but we need each other. We need the international community and well-skilled doctors and scientists to help the patients. That's all we want. You just want the people to heal again, get their lives back, go back to work, have an earning, support your family, keep your house. It's they have been ripped of everything at once.
Very, very important point. The collaboration is key. That has to continue. Carolyn, in the UK, 3 things that you think need to happen for a pathway to reform so that this never happens again.
I can't really answer that, actually. I've got some other comments that might be relevant.
Please, please open it up.
If that's okay. I think
Of
because
course.
we've had the inquiry, I think other countries haven't, you guys haven't had an inquiry, have you? So we're in a slightly different place, I think, in terms of what we're hoping for reform.
Well,
we're past that. Yeah.
If I may just add, we did have an election and we had a significant change in paradigm, but we're still facing many of the same challenges, even with the change in government. But please proceed.
I did want to just mention one thing, because you brought up the suicide amongst vaccine injured, and we did a survey amongst our membership, and the suicidal thoughts, the number of people who had considered suicide amongst our community was very high, 73%.
Wow.
And I think that's very important for people to know that. I think normally, I think we have a charity in the UK, that Mind, that says 1 in 4 adults will consider suicide at some point in their lives, whereas we've got 73% of adults who have considered it in the last 5 years. So that was one thing. You were asking one of the questions you asked was about what do we have to do to get people to trust public health again. I think in the UK that opportunity's gone now. I don't think there is anything that can be done for several generations to repair the trust that's been broken in public health in the UK. And that has affected what people are choosing to do with their own healthcare, with other matters, what people are choosing to do for their children, for even to their pets. There's been a very big rollout, excuse the pun, of what has happened as a result of the COVID vaccine rollout. Actually, it has impacted public health here hugely. And I think if they turned around and they had that opportunity during the inquiry, if they turned around and said, you know what, we messed up here by ignoring the fact that this was going to happen, because they all admitted during the inquiry that it was going to happen. They knew there were going to be injured and bereaved people. And if they'd said, you know what, we messed up, it was a pandemic, we were rushing, we were trying to get everything done as quickly as we can, we messed up, but now we're going to fix it and we're going to make that a priority. If they'd done that, I think human beings generally can be quite forgiving. I think that would have been the right thing to do. But I think now, I think that time is gone, and I think the after effects of that are going to last for generations. I think one of the things that has come about is that there are people within the injured community who, because we have been abandoned by the NHS here, we've had to explore our own ways of healing. And I think that according to the research that we've done within our community, there are people who have improved. And I know I'm definitely one of them, by doing things that are not available on the NHS. And I think that we will see more people exploring that option because nothing else has been presented to us, but in actual fact are doing because of that. And I think that we did a very detailed treatment survey amongst our community, and we found that people who were relying on pharmaceutical-based interventions were not doing as well as the people who'd been exploring more natural, holistic ways of managing their health. So I think that's going to be the next step, actually, for vaccine injured communities around the world.
And very fascinating. And I agree with you. The fact that they shut down that potential possibility at that very moment was a blow. And you're speechless when you hear that. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you as well that, and we see this in the United States, fragmentation and large millions of people looking in other directions, some physicians following, some scientists following, but clearly people are going to go to where they can get help, and they're not going to keep running against a brick wall forever. And I unfortunately, I agree with you that I think it's going to be very difficult to fully repair this situation. In Australia, Rado, in terms of next steps, we heard Brianne and Annette, we heard Carolyn. Is Australia more like UK, somewhere in the middle? How optimistic are you for reform in Australia?
Unfortunately, not at the moment. However, we have a slightly different political dynamic to most other countries in that we have compulsory voting. That has a benefit that everybody's voice is heard at the polling booth. And I guess another benefit is you tend not to get radical parties gaining any sort of power. But that may be changing partly because of what was just discussed. This massive distrust that has festered throughout the community, not just because of what happened during the pandemic and that the fact that our friends and family see how we've been treated after having, we stepped up and did what our governments asked us to do. The whole range of issues, right? But people are now starting to look at the sort of the established way of doing things in public health and other aspects of government and saying, well, this doesn't serve us anymore. So I think it's going to be until there is that may build momentum, and until that reaches a tipping point where the political class have no choice but to change things. I don't think things will change otherwise, which sort of brings me back on to what I think I'd like to see, and that is that our political class and our government need to have the mindset that they're on our side rather than on the sides of the product that they want to get out to the community. Now, that's fine if they want to make a product available, and if people want to take it, that's fine. But realize that they know that people are going to be harmed by that, and they need to stand in solidarity with us. And that means not just saying, yes, I'm sorry that this has happened to you. And it means more than that. It means we're going to get you help. We're going to pull out all the stops. If it's truly rare, there should be no reason that every single one of us doesn't get investigated by the best laboratories in the country. If it's truly rare. Same with compensation. If it's truly rare, why not compensate every single one of us? Now, if we were to go to court, the standard of proof is on the balance of probability. If you can't rule out a more likely, if there's no more likely cause, if the vaccine is the likely reason why you're in the position, that's what the standard of proof in a court is. But our governments all around the world take a much tougher burden of proof. They're looking for this absolute epidemiological cause, which goes on the product label. Well, if they want to do the right thing by us, they need to take what they told us. They said they were going to look after us. They said they were going to provide compensation programs that replace the need to go through the court system. That means treating us in the same way that a court system, or even better, in fact, than what we would get in a court system. And so until that happens, I think it's more likely than not, I think we might be struggling for a good few years before a new generation of leaders come into power and say, geez, those people back then, our forebears, did wrong by them. Let's fix it now. As happened with other issues in the past, like thalidomide and whatnot.
Well, I can say to everybody on this podcast that we believe in what you're doing, and we understand. Vaccines are public health tools, right? And they're looked at in that way, population health. Okay, that's how they're looked at. The challenge is when you translate that to every person. There are going to be externalities, there are going to be adverse events, and there are going to be injuries, and you have to deal with that. You can't just hide and pretend it isn't there. And none of these organizations are going to stop, and we're going to keep supporting you. because that's the right thing to do. Medicine, healthcare is about patients. It's not about populations. Populations are important and having that viewpoint, but it's also, you have to have each individual patient matters. That's why we have precision medicine, right? Movement happening, even among biopharma. So I want to thank everybody for taking the time. I think this has been a very important coming together of very important people that are trying to make a difference. And again, we're going to keep supporting all of you and other groups around the world. We'll try to do this again. Brandon, do you want to finalize here?
Yeah, thanks to Annette, Rado, Carolyn, Brianne for joining us today. Thank you, Daniel, for moderating this conversation. It was a great one. And for more non-biased news and independent research, please visit TrialSiteNews.com and be sure to follow us on YouTube, Rumble, and X.